and so he uses it a lot, and we've learned a lot from him about using AI, and that's how he's able to do these kind of things and do them so well.
One thing that I was really impressed with is when it says there's no information, he told me, so now make sure that you let them know that if there's no information showing on the website about that, there means there's no information on the internet. That and if somebody's running for office, that leads you to ask a question. You know, they're not putting anything out there about their platform, about what they believe in, how they'll vote, but they're running for office, and there's really nothing that we can dig up on them. That's not good either. I mean, so it I don't know. I think it would be a good thing, a tool for us to use, where we can call them up and say, hey, I see that you're voting, you know, you're opposed to whatever. And it also breaks it down to go to the bills that they voted on in the past. You could go right to them and read how, you know, the bill itself and why they voted for it or against it or whatever. So it went into a lot of detail like that.
As their voting record.
Yeah, their voting record.
And, you know, something I want to throw out real quick, Ken. When you were mentioning about the 15 Republicans running unopposed, that we're talking about how moderate they were, immediately made me think of Virginia's new governor, Spanberger. She ran as a moderate Democrat. Oh, I'll bring everybody together, et cetera, and immediately did a hard left. And we're seeing that more and more as I research some of my work for Restore First Principles, that so many politicians, especially from the Democratic side, are re-registering as Republicans, playing moderate, and then voting Democrat is really what that boils down to. It's become a real hairy circumstance as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and you know what also, Ken, you're right about that, but the alternative is if there's no one to oppose, it just goes to show that there aren't people willing to take on the responsibility, or, you know, honestly, it can't be easy to run for office anymore. We had someone actually that wrote for us last year that talked about running for office, and he said it was a nightmare. They put him through such a nightmare that he would never run for office again. So that leads right into the civility that, you know, Lexi was talking about. We shouldn't put them through that if we want them to be public servants.
Well, and we wonder how so many poor people get elected, and that's, I mean, it's for a lot of them, it's a shoo-in. They weren't opposed. So, you know, we wonder if we complain about getting people out to vote, that's one thing. But yeah, as you say, at this point, it's getting harder and harder to get people to run.
And you know, Ken, that goes back to something we've talked about on the Lessons from Rome series. The concept of disengagement, that so many people have stepped back from politics, that they just, somebody else will deal with it. I don't want to, I don't like it. Friends, family, I know a bunch of them that way. And that would lead to that same type of scenario, that good people, even those that would be capable, are just not running for office. And well, anyway, I'll get going on that. I should hold back.
So it is a civility thing. I mean, why would you look at what happens to politicians and people when they do run? You know, they get dragged through the mud and they get accused of things that they didn't do, and they get their kids' school revealed to the press, and you know, all that kind of stuff. Why would anybody run? So you end up with leadership that's of poor quality, because the good people, like, I'm not going to put myself and my family through that, which goes back to Lexi's civility thing.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, let's break up the lions. Let's have Gary Harbaugh come on and talk a little bit about what you might be in focus on your end there, Gary. What do you say?
So I would like to talk a little bit about it's called the America Reads the Bible. And this is going on right now. That it started Sunday at 9 o'clock in the morning. I believe it runs from like 9 in the morning till 9 at night. And people are reading the entire Bible at this particular hour right now. Between 7 and 8, they're reading from 1 Samuel chapters 16 through 25. And then, you know, it'll go on from there. And it's being broadcast on the internet. I think they have several goals. of the scripture reading is just to draw attention to the Bible, and they want to encourage a biblical worldview, and it's also in part a spiritual celebration. But some people, I think Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, and the President, Donald Trump, have also talked about it as a spiritual rededication of America to biblical principles. And so this is very interesting, and I hope it gets a lot of attention. It's going to take 1 week. I think it'll probably finish up. It started, Sunday morning at 9, and I think it'll run through 9 o'clock on this Saturday night. And so I think that's kind of neat. Some people may have become aware. I just recently became aware also of a movie that was recently produced and being distributed called A Great Awakening. And it is about what's historically now known as the First Great Awakening. It wasn't called that at the time. In fact, some people thought it was the Great Noise and other things. It was kind of mocked in some ways. But this Great Awakening began around 1740 and ran really through the beginning of the Revolutionary era. Preceded the Second Great Awakening, which took place, I think, in the 1800s. This movie about the Great Awakening focuses on two people, George Whitefield and actually Benjamin Franklin, who was not a religious person. He wasn't a part of the awakening in the sense of becoming some, great Christian, but he partnered with George Whitefield, and he printed George Whitefield's sermons. He printed his notes. He made a lot of money out of this, and they kind of portray that in the movie in a funny sort of way that Whitefield would ask him, "What do you expect to make out of or what do you make of the gospel?" And Franklin would reply, "I hope to make a great deal," because he was making money. Anyway, there's it's a very short series in a way about the life of George Whitefield, which if you look into it, he had a remarkable life. He had grown up poor in England, and he wanted to become an actor in the theater, and he learned to greatly project his voice. When he went to Oxford as what's called a servitor, basically a servant to the aristocracy kids who were there, sort of like being a slave, except they didn't call them slaves. It was a servitor. In many ways, they did the same things a slave might have done and served the upper class students. But you got a free education. You could sit outside and listen to the classes and learn. And so he went to Oxford in that way. Had a great spiritual awakening there, became connected with the Wesley brothers, Charles Wesley and John Wesley. And his ability to project his voice, he pretty quickly became very famous, well known in England. And then he came to America. He kind of got kicked out of England. The churches, the way they were organized, if you had a parish, a priest, or, I'm not sure exactly what title they called him, priest or preacher, had a parish, that was sort of his exclusive territory. And to invite somebody else in to preach in the pulpit was sort of frowned on. And once George Whitefield became famous, they sort of shunned him and said, no, we don't want him coming here, because he was in some ways critical of the existing, preachers that were preaching, because they were very rote and kind of boring, as many people thought. And the church in England had come to really be a church only of the upper classes of people. And George Whitefield began he'd go to a field or, he went to the coal mining district and he started preaching to these, common, ordinary people. And he was a very fiery orator and very inspirational, became well known. When he came to America, he preached to as many as 20 to 30,000 people at one time. And the record says everyone could hear him and understand him well, because he was so effective at projecting his voice. And so it's kind of interesting to tie those together. I think we are in the beginnings now of a spiritual revival in America. I think we're beginning to see the signs of it. And we don't know yet where it's going to go from here. But this Bible reading, maybe more of a focus on the scriptures itself, and then some of the historical people from our founding era. The First Great Awakening really preceded the American Revolution. This stuff's going on, and I think it's interesting to see, and hopefully it'll continue. And I think, as far as Convention of States is concerned, we are, in a sense, tied in with this because the founders of Convention of States realized, in studying history, that there has never been a real political awakening that was not preceded by or accompanied by a great spiritual awakening. And so I think it's significant that we're in the early stages of a spiritual awakening, as we in Convention of States are in this political battle to get an Article 5 convention called, which really in many ways is a political awakening of people to the idea that we, the people, through our state legislatures, can actually change the structure of the federal government.
Yeah, Gary, it's interesting. I think too that we've had a couple of programs in the past where we talked about, obviously, the Gen Zs and the younger generation, where there's a big surge of males that are returning to church. Not so much on the female side, but the males are seem to be returning to church. So I think a lot of those things that we're starting to see on the from the younger generations is all part of that spiritual revival. And I think it's when you talk about some of these great preachers and great speakers of the past, I think. I can't say that there's any one particular. It's not like there's a Billy Graham of today that I can think of, but I think the revitalization is certainly starting to show, and where that spark is coming from, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I think if there was anybody today that really was speaking to that, it was Charlie Kirk, and of course he was assassinated. Each awakening that has happened has taken place in a different way. One of the things about George Whitefield, they said that he really he brought about in many ways a social revolution in England, because the church began to reach, through his work, the lower classes of people that had never, the Church of England and so forth really focused on the aristocracy and the upper crust of society, and the common people weren't really thought that much of. And George Whitefield, because of his speaking ability, and he traveled all the way up and down the East Coast multiple times, usually on horseback while reading his Bible. He was the first real superstar in America. He was a guy that they said that, I can't remember, something like half of the people or more probably heard him speak when he preached throughout the American colonies. That's pretty remarkable when you think about a time when there wasn't, television, there wasn't internet, social media, anything like that. Just a guy on horseback coming and going to, he would just get on the balcony of maybe a public courthouse or something and start speaking. Yeah. And I think it's pretty amazing, and I think this is going to shape up differently than others, and maybe it'll be led by young men, returning to church, returning to spirituality. Be interested in see what other observations around the you guys here tonight, see if you see the same kinds of things happening where you are and what you're hearing and seeing.
I saw today where tomorrow evening, I think between 6 and 7, President Trump is going to read the passage of the Bible from 2 Chronicles, which includes, if my people who are called by name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then and turn from their wicked ways, and I'll hear from heaven and heal their land. But then when you go further down, it's just when after the temple was built and everything by Solomon, and then it says how God's going to judge those who worship false gods, and it's pretty it's kind of brutal passage. But that's the one he's going to read tomorrow night. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I actually was forwarded a couple days ago a schedule, and it had the names and the times, and perhaps Debbie, that's where you got the stuff about Trump, because our one of our local legislators, Representative, Jordan Redmond, who I've met several times. That's side note though. He actually read this morning. And so I was able to tune in and listen to him. And it was just nice seeing somebody that I've met personally. He and his dad is a very major player here in Idaho, ex-senator, very involved in convention estates, et cetera. So it just kind of did my heart good to sit and watch somebody on national television. Well, not national television. I shouldn't say that's not quite true. But, you know, to be able to be in a situation like that and share. And he's a very, very faithful man, Catholic, six kids. I think it's 6 kids, which is not uncommon here in North Idaho. So I go to a Catholic church myself, and yeah, we well, anyway, no sense going down that path. I wanted to mention, well, you know what? I'll let that subject finish out. Sorry, I don't mean to change topics on you.
That's all right. Anybody else have anything to add to this? Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I heard that there were 500 speakers that would be reading. So that's quite a few people involved. And May 7th, I don't know if you realize, is a national day of prayer. So it will lead right into that. And then again on May 18th, they're planning the spiritual rededication of America, which is the Ascension Day and the pouring out of the Spirit of Truth, you know, historically. So that's kind of an important date too. So I think this is great for us. You know, and COS has our aspirational goal is to politically and spiritually transform the nation.
That's
so
true.
We're on our way.
Good point. Good point. Anybody else?
I think
No?
that ties in with Lexi because
Yeah.
she's talking about civility, you know, loving your neighbor. And a lot of that comes with the revival from the Lord. I mean, so
Yeah.
they will go hand in hand. Yeah, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Good, Rick.
I'll just comment on that. You know, part of this revival that you're talking about, you know, we need this in America because the civility part gets back to how we treat others and value others. So it's, you know, if you have a communist China, I think is an example of that. If you have a country or a group of people that don't have religion, they don't value other people, they don't value human life. They don't value human life, which is, you know, like the organ harvesting and all that kind of stuff. But the nation really does need to have this spiritual foundation so that we do treat people civilly. We do treat others, we do value others, and we value ourselves. And that's been kind of one of my things I've talked about in the past few years. Is, you know, with our kids, you know, if they don't value themselves or value each other, then they get into drugs and they get into the violence and they get into, you know, just not doing anything, you know, sitting around playing video games because they don't think they're worth anything. Life has no meaning for them. But it's that spiritual aspect that you are a child of God that gives them a sense of value in their selves and in their life. And when they value themselves, they treat themselves better, they treat other people better, and it just makes a whole, you know, better nation and a better world. And when we are a nation, you know, in God we trust and that type of thing.
I would definitely like to kind of piggyback on that real quick, Rick, because your point is so well made. And even going back to what Gary mentioned, I personally feel that a lot of the reason there's such a resurgence, especially amongst the men, or young men, I should say, has as much to do with the fact that there isn't anything that's bigger than themselves. And that's very much to the point you were making, Rick. At least that's the way I took it. You know, government or the whole Marxist ideology, et cetera, you know, that takes you away from, and government is your religion. Government should be giving you everything you need, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of young people are kind of step back going, but that doesn't really work for me. It doesn't fill my heart with anything.
Right.
And I think, and I'm obviously at a very high level of that, but I think that's a great deal of the resurgence in all churches, whether it be, Baptist, Presbyterian, Catholic, wherever you might be or want to go, that is leading to that. I know I've seen a lot more people this summer come back into church. We usually have a resurgence in spring as people come back from other parts of the country in the North Idaho. They don't like the winters. Can you tell? I don't blame them. But so we always have an increase in the congregation, but it's been a little bigger this year. And we even did a head count this last weekend just to kind of get a feel for that. And definitely a lot more young people involved, which does my heart great good.
For sure. Susan and I, that's what we claim to do, especially since we've retired. We work for God now, and we see that. We see, we reach a lot of young people with the projects that we've been doing. So there is a spiritual hunger out there among the young people that needs to be filled.
Gary, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, if people want to look into this, go online. It's called AmericaReadsTheBible.com. That's where they can find it. They can get the schedule. For every hour, it lists the passage that they're reading and who is reading it. And as I think Susan mentioned, I think more than 500 people are involved. And, it usually tells if they're a pastor or who they are, what ministry they might be with. But hundreds of people are involved. So it's really neat. It's very, ecumenical. It's across the board. It's not, this denomination and you have to be with us or else. It's very broad-based and it's the Bible. I think they're using a King James version with some of the words updated. It's not the new King James it's kind of been changed a little bit more, but this is contemporized so that, it's a bit more understandable. We're not really good at that 1600 type English. The other comment I'd like to make about young men is, if you all remember the mantra of the feminist movement from many years ago was, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. That was their little mantra. You guys remember that? Am I the only one? So anyway, many things for the last 50 years have tended to devalue men. And, in education, used to be, women don't have equality in education. Well, now like 60-70% of all the college students in America are women, and doctors and lawyers and all the professions. Now, many of the schools have more women than men, and men feel like they've been pushed aside and excluded from many things. And so I think that's part of the thing. There's an emptiness there, maybe, that's drawing them back to church, back to spirituality, and connecting with things that are real.
Yeah. No, we'll move on after this. I have just a comment that kind of follows what Ken and Rick were saying. I had a busy video week this past week, and I actually ended up at the University of Illinois in the middle of the week, filming a keynote speaker at the university. Turned out to be a young Chinese immigrant, grew up in Beijing, went through, left Beijing after high school. I think it was somewhere shortly after high school. And he's a Christian. And he talked pretty much. There's so many things. I've got some of the video clips I want to bring on for another program. So that's why I don't want to get too deep into it. But boy, it was amazing listening to somebody who grew up there talk about how the government basically is God there. And the people are so entrenched, and it's so driven year in and year out. As long as the Communist Party has ruled there, that the people are just they're numb, and it's sad. But he talked even their history books. You won't find anything about the 1989 Tiananmen Square thing. It's not you can't find it anywhere. It's just gone. So it's amazing. It's amazing that when you talk about that. How men nowadays, or boys and men that are feeling that emptiness because they're not getting it, and they're not getting anything anywhere else. So they're really searching, and I think that's driving that point as well. So we'll move on. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I think a lot of this started with, and I'm going to say was the devaluation of women. You know, women's role is the most important role a woman can have is a mom, raising good children, raising good families and things like that. And somewhere in the 1960s, we got into this thing of devaluing that role in society when that's the most important role in society. Women had the most important role, but then they got into this thing of, well, you can't be a woman unless you have a career or, you know, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that started this ball rolling where now we're devaluing men, but really what they're devaluing is the relationship of a man and a woman that is the basis of family, and family is the basis of civilization. So when we do that, then when we lose the family culture, then we lose our society, I think.
It really comes down to devaluing others. I mean, any group that's being devalued, it's not good. And it goes back to, again, what Lexi said, treating people right, having people understand their own worth and feeling our own worth as well, and just treating each other well. And I mean, that's
a little bit of respect, as the song would say. You know, just give me a little bit of respect. But yeah,
right.
It certainly has been something that I think that this revival that we starting to see and hope for could at least bring us back to a point in America where civility is at least something that people can get along. There's just too many cliches that go along with all this portions of it, but it is to the point, and Debbie, you mentioned it too, social media, everything. We didn't have that years when we were kids. It is a whole new world that we've been living in, and I think that the correction needs to be made. So anybody else anything else to say? We'll move on and get Ken W in here to see what you think tonight, Ken, now that we've covered a number of topics.
Good stuff. I won't go down that path. I'll stick with my news story. I've always got things to say about everything, so I'll try and stay focused here. I was reading the news this morning and came across a story about that just today, Senator Rick Scott introduced new legislation that would basically repudiate the 2019 Trump impeachment, stating that it lacks legitimacy. So naturally, I dug into that to see what's actually going on. Apparently, DNI Tulsi Gabbard declassified a bunch of new documentation, and basically it showed that the foundation of the 2019 Trump impeachment, of course there were two, this is only the 2019, is basically kind of cracking wide open. So Scott is pushing again to formally repudiate the impeachment. He's calling the entire process an abuse of power, and his resolution demands investigation and even potential prosecution if wrongdoing is confirmed, which I would have to believe it will be. But we'll see. Obviously, we don't want to get ahead of that whole horse, so to speak. But again, came after Tulsi Gabbard revealed that Congress and Trump's legal team were actually kept from evidence showing that the whistleblower whose allegations about the Ukraine policy that prompted that impeachment actually misled investigators in his first report, only had hearsay evidence to back up his allegations. And in essence, the whole thing then was what Scott is terming as the potential for bias. Now, again, I apologize. Throat's still not good. And of course, let's face it, if government officials manipulated evidence or misled investigators, they really didn't just target President Trump, though obviously that was their main focus, but they really undermined the very concept of a republic. And I find it really troubling that both Congress and we as the American people were denied the critical facts about what really went on. And specifically, it turns out that Trump's legal team didn't have access to the information. And obviously that could have altered the entire outcome of that entire impeachment, shut it down really before it got going. So, to me, that really kind of, I guess what I would term the key point in that is basically how can we trust the judicial system and any proceeding that claims legitimacy when evidence is selectively hidden. Really, it kind of flies in the face of everything our founders stood for, especially the right to a fair trial. So Gabbard's decision to declassify the materials gives us a clearer picture. I'm always, in my writing, I talk a lot about shining sunlight on hidden truths, things in the background, etc. And to me, Senator Scott is really pushing, kind of opening the shades and letting in the light. And one last real quick point, I kind of found it interesting because just last week on the show, I spoke about the two-tiered justice system, and I've done that a couple of times in my Lessons from Rome segment. And literally, this is it on full display at national, even international level, to show really how we have a two-tiered justice system at this point in time. It's gotten really bad, and I don't know how we come back from it, but that was my big takeaway from the last few days in the news.
Excellent. And obviously at this point, I know Dale wants to see that Rome presentation just keep on going, Ken. So if you can dig up some more, that's fine. But it is an amazing parallel to look at that. It is amazing. It really is. When you talk about history repeating itself. Oh,
absolutely. And as I've said on those lessons, and I know Dale likes them, and I know he wants me to keep going. Summer's busy time around here, but we'll see what we can do.
I appreciate it.
Because I actually enjoy doing them, and it's amazing the things that I find that correlate between the writing I do on Restore First Principles and the things that I'm finding when I look at what happened to Rome. Because if we don't restore those principles, if we don't turn back, much like the religious revival that we're seeing within the country, we're in deep stuff. There's just no real way around that. And so it makes me think quite a bit about being staying on top of that and doing what I can to help out. I don't know if I can do every week, but at least once a month. Right. I think don't tell Dale, okay? Like Lexi.
No, we won't. We won't let the cat out of the bag, Ken, and we do appreciate you
saying,
tonight. That even though you're not fully over that cold of yours, but
Ooh, yeah, my chain. He's got my chain. He likes to yank that puppy, so it's all good.
All right. Anybody got anything else to add to what Ken's talking about tonight? If not,
I might just say.
Go ahead, Gary.
In criminal proceedings, there are all kinds of formal rules and so forth in the both federal and state levels, but impeachment is something that's just sort of wide open. But as Ken has pointed out, the principle of fairness is there. In a criminal trial, the prosecutors are formally required by the rules to give the defendant any exculpatory evidence that they have. There isn't really a formal rule that says that for impeachment because, they didn't bother writing procedures for that, but the principle certainly is there. And it's a huge violation of the fundamental notions of fairness that we have in America in our trials and court system to, railroad somebody the way they did Donald Trump. And I think it's great that this evidence is beginning to come out, and hopefully there will be more done. We all want to see the wrongdoers actually prosecuted. And anyway, we'll see what happens. I hope that happens.
Could I throw something else out? Oh, I'm sorry, Susan, please go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt either, but I was just going to say, I heard there was a possibility, if this is true and they can prove it, and it sounds like they have, that it would be tantamount to a mistrial and that his record could be expunged, that it would be totally wiped clean of the
Right.
impeachment. So I'm not sure if that's possible, but they're talking about
Well,
it.
you know, I actually looked into that, knowing that I was going to talk about that. And Scott called it a repudiation. I had to go look up that term, to be honest, to make sure I understood what it stood for. But apparently, that basically be coming back from even an attempt at impeachment has never happened in this country in almost 250 years. There have been a few things where it's come close. There's only been, I think, 5, I guess, because there were 3 before Trump, and obviously he's had 2 or gone through 2. So, but it's never happened. So either way, it's historic. But if those that are allegedly guilty, I'll be kind here, are brought to justice, I think that would do an awful lot of good towards the, shall we say, more right-wing side of the MAGA movement that is really frustrated, especially with Pam Bondi. I think that was part of the reason she was let go, because we didn't see anybody being held to account. You know, I mean, all these things that we saw go on during the Biden administration, nobody's gone to jail. Yeah. I mean, come on, really? So the other thing that I wanted to bring up real quick, if I could, Ken, just something that I saw this last week, and it's been all over Facebook and YouTube this week. Week before last, I believe it was, Justice Clarence Thomas did a speech in the University of Texas. He went for about an hour, but he literally hammered the progressive movement in his statements. Didn't call out individuals, but just the movement as a whole. He called it progressivism. Highly recommend that anybody that wants to, 2 things: learn from the longest serving justice that we have on the Supreme Court right now, and his thoughts about what's going on in this country. I had to it did my heart a lot of good, because he very much coincided with a lot of the things that I write on Restore First Principles. Same concept. And of course, that's kind of the level I try and work at. The other thing I found out, he's got a heck of a sense of humor. He just cracked up about some things and stories about his mom and his grandfather who raised him. And I had no idea this guy could tell jokes and carry on and had a booming laugh. Did my heart real good. It really personalized him. The message was great, and it gave a real personal viewpoint of this man that, of course, you rarely hear about Supreme Court justices. They don't do this kind of thing very often at all. Highly recommend, if anybody gets a chance, that they get in and look at his, watch his speech.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Rick, what do you got tonight? I know you're gonna lighten things up and talk about the moon. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought I'd talk about the Artemis 2 mission. I've kind of got Ken's voice myself here going on, but yeah, there's yeah, I need one probably, but yeah, I wanted to talk about the Artemis 2 mission. And you know, I'm a child of the '60s, and I remember when Apollo 8 went around the moon the first time, and so I can see, you know, the parallels between the two, and then the differences between the two over the last 58 years for sure. But I think the first thing I want to point out about the space program is, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, why are we spending all this money to go to the moon and things like that? You know, why we could use that money back here on Earth. But, you know, there's 2 great drivers in civilization. There's 2 great drivers of progress. One is war. You know, you look at what World War II did for society and technology, and you look at the state of aircraft before World War II and aircraft after World War II, and it's just, you know, light years difference. So war is a driver of technology, but we don't want to drive technology with that. So President Kennedy gave us a problem to solve. And I think that's one of the great things about America, is that we are problem solvers. You know, we're solving problems. Problems come up, we figure out how to provide a solution for the problem. And but President Kennedy gave us this problem, and when you have a problem, that creates the need to create solutions. And through that problem solving, we created all kinds of technology that, you know, the world changed because it's a space program in the '60s, because, you know, the technology and what it's done for our world. So, But so when people complain about the money we spend on the space program, it's really a great investment, honestly. You know, the money that we spend on the space program, we get back in technology that comes from solving the problem of getting to the moon or wherever we're trying to get to. So there's that. And then, you know, with Apollo 8, I remember that. You know, everybody remembers the Earthrise picture and how that changed the world. And, you know, they read the from Genesis on Christmas Eve with that mission. And, you know, Reed Wiseman, who was on this Artemis trip, you know, he has basically said he left Earth an atheist and came back a believer because of what he experienced and what he saw. And the Earthrise picture from Apollo 8 kind of did that for a lot of people on the planet when they got to see that. It changed the world. Our concept of all of us living on this same little bitty grain of sand out there, you know, that changed our thinking toward a lot of things, what, you know, other people in the world or, you know, countries and things like that. I think we've kind of lost some of that, unfortunately, but hopefully this might bring us back to that. You know, the picture of the eclipse, that's what really, I think, got Reed Wiseman and inspired him in his awe and his spiritual experience that he had. So there's that common thread between Apollo 8 and Artemis, I think. So, you know, one of the things that's really changed a lot with the space program in the last 58 years, I remember, you know, I was a space nerd when I was in school. You know, I got a lot of, you know, teasing about that because I was really the only one. I was 15 years old in 1968, and you know, it took a lot of teasing because I was the only kid in school that believed there was life on other planets and things like that. So, but you know, then we thought, man, there's a lot going on in the space program, but that was like there was a launch every 6 months. You know, we thought that was a big deal, but now SpaceX is launching a rocket every 2 or 3 days. So, you know, that sort of thing. So it's changed a lot, and the privatization of space has created that. I think, you know, the government's kind of cut back on NASA, but the need for satellites, the need for getting equipment out into space has really driven in the demand for commercialization of space. But, you know, and Elon Musk with the SpaceX has really, they've really changed the world in the space program, because just like the, you know, Blue Origin had the flight the other day, you know, landing a booster was, you know, I think it was 2014 when the SpaceX first landed a booster. And, you know, before that, people thought that was crazy. You'd never land a booster, you know, especially an orbital class booster. But now SpaceX has just done it 600 times. So you think about that and what that's done for the space program. Those 600 boosters they brought back are probably worth about $50 million a piece. So take 600 times 50 million, and that's how much they've cut the cost of getting stuff into orbit. So, you know, that's one big thing that's changed there that way. And so I think another thing that's really changed that I've noticed is the difference in the crew's reaction. I remember, you know, they would interview like people like Neil Armstrong and Frank Borman, who was on, you know, he was the commander of Apollo 8. And they would ask him, how did that feel to you? And these guys were all engineers and they were test pilots, and they didn't understand the question. What do you mean how I felt? I didn't think about how it made me feel. I was trying to, you know, fly the spaceship, and that, so they didn't really understand that concept of how that experience felt. Now they did afterwards, of course, because a lot of those guys were changed by, you know, going to the moon and walking on the moon. But this crew here, when they came back, I saw the interview that they did, you know, a few days after they got back, got through their debrief and stuff, and they were almost in tears trying to explain, and they were just very emotional about their experience, and that was unheard of in 1968 for a space flight crew to come back and talk about how the experience made them feel. So, you know, I think that's a good thing too. So. But
go ahead, Rick. Yeah, what do you want to add? Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the smallness and the humbleness that brings about. It shrinks the big heads of most humans to understand just how insignificant we are, really, how small we are, and how dependent we are on God, actually. But I was going to say too, I was going to add that I read an article that that again goes into this Trump 3D, 4D, 5D chess that he plays, and the article was talking about the war that's actually going on in space. And people just aren't even aware of the significance of everything that's going on, and the fact that at some point putting people back on the moon and equipment and what have you has a lot to do with the war that's going on. It's really hard to I can't really explain it all really well. I just know that there's something additional that again is going on that people don't see and understand.
That's a very valid point, Ken. It really is, because the Apollo program was created because of our competition with Russia. It was who had the best technology, and that was, then who were all these other countries going to follow? Were they going to go communism? Or were they going to go, capitalism? And so that was the big thing of why we had to get there first. But now the war that you're talking about is actually between us and China, because the big fear is that if China gets to the moon first, China can very easily say, we're claiming the moon for China. And what would you do? So we got to get there first in order to prevent that from happening, because there's a lot of resources on the moon. Everybody talks about the heavy water and that sort of thing. But, we really need to get there just for a sovereignty aspect of it, that we can't allow them to take the moon and claim the whole thing for themselves, which they could do, I guess. I think that's the big fear. That's kind of the war that's going on right now in space.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you say if they got there first and claimed the whole thing, they'd still have to wrestle with somebody to take that American flag down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting but difficult situation for sure.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Anybody else got any thoughts on that, on the moon and the war?
Well, I actually wanted to ask Rick a quick question, since you termed yourself a space nerd, as I believe the term that you used, because I wasn't quite to that level, and I was a couple years younger, but I still remember most of that. My question is, though, it's almost more on a personal level, to be honest, if you've ever read any Robert Heinlein and any of his The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, or he did probably 50 books dealing with the moon and space travel, time, space continuums, all that. I mean, back in the 50s when he was writing this stuff, my understanding was that NASA actually went to him as a consultant because he wrote so much about actually putting men on the moon and living there and that kind of thing. So I was curious if you had ever read any of his stuff.
I have not read any of his stuff. I've not heard that name, but this space program started way back. Certainly the 1950s was a turning point in it, but actually it began many years ago with Wernher von Braun and all that back in World War II, and even earlier than that. I can't think of the fellow's name that invented the liquid fuel rocket, but anyway. So, but it's been a long time coming, and a lot of great advances from that. So,
If you're a reader at all, I think you would enjoy Heinlein, Heinlein, I believe it is. I'd have to look it up, to be honest. Fascinating work that deals specifically with what it sounds like you were enthralled with as a kid. I'll put it that way.
One of my big thrills recently, Susan's dad actually worked on the Surveyor program. He got to work on parts for that, or not the Surveyor, Voyager. I mean, he worked on the part of the reactor for the Voyager, so that was pretty cool. And then,
we didn't realize that until we were on a vacation with him.
Yeah.
And it was 50 years later. He couldn't tell me where he worked as a kid, and it was a brief period of time that he worked there. But they got to talking about rockets, because Rick built a lot of rockets when he was a kid, and that got him started. I guess it's been 50 years. Susie, I can finally tell you where I was working. And he got into the story about it at working at JPL. And so we heard all the stories as we were driving in the mountains of New Mexico on vacation. So.
Yeah. So we've, as a space nerd, I get a big thrill out of little things. But, recently one of my friends, we were talking about the space program, and he said, "Oh yeah, I worked for this company, and we did the test of the astronaut emergency exit." So he got, that big cable thing where they ride down, like if the rocket's getting ready to blow up, they get in there and they ride down the slide. He got to be the one to test that first time. So, there was that. Another friend of ours, he worked on the space shuttle, and he said that he didn't work for NASA, but he worked for one of the contractors. And some technician dropped a wrench down in the space shuttle. Oh. So what he did was borescope. So he went in there with the space shuttle and did the borescope, went down in this guts of this thing and grabbed that little wrench and pulled it out. And so I shook his hand. And I said, I've got to shake the hand that actually touched the space shuttle. So I just, just showed you I'm not, it doesn't take much to thrill me, I guess.
Nothing wrong with that, Rick. Nothing wrong with that.
Before you move on, I do want to touch on something you said, though, Ken, sure. Because one of the conundrums, I'm not sure that's the right word, but you were talking about the smallness of people in space. And I can see where, like, Reed Weissman and stuff being out there, and you look at where you're at, and you're in the spaceship, and you see the moon's over there, the sun's over there, and the earth's over there, and you feel like this very, very small thing. But at the same time, you look at the planet Earth, and all the billions of people are on that, and then you're like, we're pretty darn important in the universe. So you get this, I'm a very, very small and insignificant thing, but yet on the other hand, I'm part of something that's life out here in the universe. That's what the universe was created for. Right. So, I could see where somebody would have an extremely spiritual, emotional reaction to all that. So
created in his image, and we all have something to do. Whether we figure it out or not is another thing. But yeah. Well, Debbie, no, go ahead, Susan. You have something else to add?
I just have one thing to say. In my mind, this is real progress. And when you use the word progressivism, it seems like progress doesn't belong in that word.
Yeah.
By what it's actually, means and what it's actually doing to our lives. So that's all.
Very good. Very good. Debbie, Dale would be amazed. You've been pretty quiet tonight.
I know, right? I've been minding my P's and Q's.
I'm going to give you your time. You got something that you wanted to bring on?
Just very quickly. I did want to say, though, kind of piggybacking off of Susan, that's typically what the Democrats do is they give you a term to describe something that's the exact opposite of what it actually is. Yeah. So it's very deceptive. And I don't like that. Like, let's just be honest about what we're doing. If you're really doing the right thing, you don't need to be deceptive. Right. Anyways, I'm back to this immigration thing, and here's why. I'm not going to go into all the details because I know we're bumping up on 8:30. Plus, my battery is like, there's this much left. If I go out, that's why.
I got you.
Anyway, so the House just voted on extending the temporary protected status for 350,000 Haitians. It has to go to the Senate still and everything. 10 Republicans supported it. It was 224 to 204, I think it was. Now, Trump's administration has always been deport, let's, and maybe there's a good reason. Those 350,000 Haitians, maybe Haiti's still really in bad shape. That's not really my beef. What I'm looking at is we're talking about saving money, the federal government saving money, fiscal constraint. And this whole immigration thing is crazy. Okay, I know some people said there's 20 million illegals, 30 million, whatever. But if you go back 15 years when Obama started, there's probably 50 million is what I've heard. Okay. Well, let's just go with 46 million because I'm going to do some math here. The United States in 15 months, which is right now on April 20th. So he came in the 20th of January, right? So we're exactly the 20th. So next month at this time, he will be 1/3 done with his 4-year term. 16 out of 48 months. We have deported 460,000 people out of 46 million. That's 1% in 1/3 of his term. So let's take that 1% and multiply it by 3. That means when he leaves office, if we stay where we're at, now I'm not including the 1.5 million that supposedly self-deported, because they're not going to keep self-deporting. We're probably done with that, right?
Right.
So we've got about 2 million people that we've got that have left the country. We've got 40 some million more. Some people just say they're just counting what came in during Biden, but I think there was a lot more that came in before that too. So it concerns me because just in 2023, we spent $150 billion just on illegal immigration. That's 150 with 9 zeros behind that.
Wow.
That's in 1 year. Now, this is before ICE came in, and we're spending all this money in ICE, which I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's just a lot of money. So and most illegals, when they come here, we are putting them up. We are paying for all their things. Now, I don't think the founding fathers had that in mind when they had said, yes, come and immigrate to our country. And by the way, you need to assimilate into our culture, and you need to take our civics tests, and you need to do all these things. Now we have this whole hodgepodge of people, and some of them are probably great people, but they came in illegally. By the way, I just said a statistic today that in the last year, 62% of the murders in our nation were by illegals.
Wow.
2 out of every 3. We have got to do something. And now the Trump administration has backed off of, the ICE. I don't know the best way to do it, but he ran on that. He ran on that. And he has backed off of that quite a bit, unless he's doing it and I'm not hearing about it. But I just went out to the official website, the latest ICE, 458,000 arrests. People currently in detention is 60,000, and total deportations, I said 460,000 is 468.
Wow.
So we have gotten rid of 1% in 1/3 of this term. Am I the only person that's like doing the math here? So, and here's the other thing I want to say. It's not the government's job. It's the church's job to take care of people.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know what that means. Does the church need to stand, rise up and do this? But the government needs to stop paying for all this using our money. They're not even listening to their constituents about bringing people in. They're bringing them in whether we want it or not. And then we're paying for it out of our money, right? So our roads and our bridges and all these other issues that we have here in the homeland are not being done because a lot of 150 billion in 1 year. So 10 years, let's see, let's put another 0 on there. So now we got 1.5 trillion, right? In 10 years. So I'm a math teacher. So I think in terms of percents and numbers, and that really makes me angry.
Yeah. Not to mention the stress it puts on our education system, on our health system, on our food, everything. Yeah.
And these whole people driving these trucks. I was glad to see that Indiana revoked, I can't remember how many thousands of licenses here in Indiana because they weren't getting the correct CDL license. They're driving these semis, and there's all these accidents going on. I don't know if you guys have paid attention, but it's off the charts.
A couple of them right here in Indiana. So it's getting close to home, but
Yeah.
Well, an interesting.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, real quick. I don't know if we're running out of time right away or not, but a real quick point, Debbie. Obviously, I deal a lot with the founders in my writing, and I literally just about a week ago, I want to say, wrote about that very point you made about immigration during that time. There was no such thing as an illegal immigrant in the founding era. I mean, that didn't really start till 100 or so years ago. And so at that point, of course, they wanted people to come in, but you're right. They assimilated. And that's really the difference. And in my mind, anyway, not only the fact that we're giving them phones and hotel rooms to stay in and paying their rents and giving them free housing, on and on and on, that 150 billion that you mentioned. But just the fact that during our founding, they brought people in or were happy to bring them in, but they always assimilated. And that's the part to me that is really bothersome. almost as much as the money and the cost, the strain it's putting on our system as a whole. And I not to change the subject, but the group that specifically doesn't assimilate are the, I hate to say it, shall we call them Minnesotans? They just refuse. And they are going to keep their own culture and do what they want to do, go with Sharia law, which I know, Ken, you probably remember I talked about quite some time back on this show. And now it's become much more prevalent, the whole Sharia law aspect. And so from that perspective alone to me, and there's our Constitution and Sharia law are like oil and water. They just will never mix. And if we let them get really settled in here in that sense, it's just going to be nasty. I know Glenn Beck wrote about that stuff and wrote books about it 10, 12 years ago. I used to read his stuff about that. Really adamant. And he started talking about it again recently, which I thought was real interesting. Had some great books about that and discussed numbers and how many and the differences between Islam and Christianity as a whole. And their belief is basically we will take over the world at all costs and we will cause chaos to do it so that we can take over. And if we can't physically beat you, we'll outbreed you. And I'm sorry, but Europe has let them in. I mean, there are certain countries that have better than 40% that are Muslim or are not of that country, maybe is a better way to put it, because there's a great variety in all fairness. But a majority of them are Muslim. That's a tough thing to me. And that's where I go when you talk about some of the immigration issues that way and the differences by not assimilating that they bring into this country heavily impact us that way.
Just speak some English for a change. I mean,
well, there is that.
You gotta, just learn the language if you're going to live here. It's a continuing problem, and it's showing up worse in California, Minnesota. I mean, if we could, auction them off somehow and make a trade somewhere, I think we'd all be better for it. But I know we are getting a little close on time. My thing tonight, like I said, I have this China interview that I would like to pull a few clips from and use in another show at some point in the next week or two. But the thing that caught my attention this week, we've done a great job of blowing up ships in the sea that are bringing fentanyl over and everything. The new drug that China is also now trying to kill us with is called carfentanil. I don't know whether you've heard of it or not. CARFENTANIL, I think is what it is. I saw a program on this just the other night. It is literally almost impossible to detect by law enforcement. They have nothing to show to show this drug like they do with others. And it's 10 times deadlier than fentanyl. It's our next drug problem. It's our next drug problem coming from China. So, I mean, I think that's the right spelling. If not, it's close. You might be able to find some things on it, but very dangerous. And it's being put in so many different things that, boy, if we don't nip this quick, we are going to see another explosion of deaths as far as I can see. So with that, I will ask if anybody's got anything else further to say. If not, we're going to go ahead and wrap up tonight. Appreciate everybody coming on, and look forward to Dale coming back next week and interrogating us all once again. So
can't wait.
Come on, you enjoyed it, Ken. Come on now, in the captain's chair there.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't get to put it. I didn't put you to the test near as much, Ken.
This is true. True.
He's going to get on me for that. He's going to ask me why. He's going to ask me why I didn't drill down on Ken W.
Yeah.
So thank you all again. And as I said, I hope you guys can come back again soon. I know you all will. I really appreciate you being willing to jump in the last minute, and we were able to put it together. So
thanks for the invitation, and we enjoyed it.
Great to hear.
Take care, everybody.
Debbie, I think you're running out of power. If you are, I'm going to leave you on for just a second, and we we phase out. I have a John Ackerman soapbox, so we'll bring John on and then close out.
Sounds good.
All right. Let me find everybody here and go through the circles and not miss anybody. There we go. Bye. Okay. We're going to go ahead and run John's soapbox.
John Ackerman for Convention of States. I want to talk to you today about phobias. What does phobia mean? A phobia is an anxiety disorder. It's defined by irrational, unrealistic, persistent, or excessive fear. It can cause real distress and avoidance behavior. The term comes from the Greek word phobos, and it means fear. In modern public discourse, however, words like xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia are often used to describe prejudice, hostility, hatred, and discrimination rather than fear. This usage is wrong. Using phobia to mean hatred is wrong. In Convention of States, we don't hate anyone. Listen to me. 2 of our core values, you can find these on conventionofstates.com. 2 of our core values are, first of all, be kind. And I'm quoting from the website. We believe in the golden rule. We treat others the way we want to be treated. We seek to have positive interactions with others while being professional, respectful, and speaking the truth boldly with love. Close quote. That's the first of the 2 core values I want to talk to you about. Be kind. The second one is to revere Judeo-Christian values. Again, I'm going to quote from the website. Our republic was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, including that every individual is created in God's image and endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. It is the duty of the government, of, by, and for the people, to secure those rights. Close quote. That's the second of the core values, to revere Judeo-Christian values. So you see, in Convention of States, we don't hate. We don't hate. But there are some things we're afraid of. Yes, we're phobic about some things. We're afraid of some things. We're afraid of losing our republic. We're afraid of foreign powers that wish to destroy us. We're afraid of malevolent actors with evil intent. Phobic? Oh yes, there are things that we really fear. But hatred, not on your life.
Well, Debbie, I think John had another good close to a lot of what we were talking about tonight.
He always does.
He always does. Yeah, he's found a whole new avenue to run on, and he's doing a great job. So we appreciate John's soapbox episodes, and I do appreciate you sitting in my chair tonight.
Absolutely.
I always it's nice to be able to have somebody who's such a contributor join, and I think at this point, we hope that Dale's move has gone well, and we wish to see him back in his chair pretty soon. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out tonight. We're going to let Marango take us out as we normally do, and hope to see everybody back again next week. So thanks for joining in tonight, and look forward to seeing you again next week.
Marengo Mike here with a reminder of the importance of this year as we continue to grow the grassroots army of volunteers and the mission of using the Constitution to fix the ills of our government. Use the QR code if you haven't signed the petition and consider using your talents to become an active volunteer. Thank you, and God bless.